The wrought iron gates of Blackwood Manor did not welcome visitors. They merely tolerated them. As Elara pushed against the rusted metal, the hinges screamed, a high, piercing shriek that echoed through the valley and sent a murder of crows scattering from the canopy of the ancient oaks overhead. Elara paused, her hand lingering on the cold metal. Most people would have turned back. The air here was heavy, saturated with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something sweeter, like overripe jasmine rotting on the vine. But Elara wasn't most people. She preferred the company of plants to people, and the silence of a neglected garden was a language she understood better than any spoken word. She adjusted the heavy strap of her canvas tool bag, her leather boots crunching loudly against the gravel driveway. She had been hired sight unseen. The letter had arrived at her small landscaping shop in the city 3 days ago, written on parchment so thick it felt like fabric. The instructions were sparse, written in an elegant, looping script that seemed to belong to a different century. Restore the sculpture garden. Do not disturb the house. Payment upon completion. The driveway wound upwards for a mile, flanked by trees that had grown wild and tangled, their branches interlacing to block out the weak afternoon sun. When the manor finally broke through the tree line, it loomed like a dark mountain against the gray sky. It was a sprawling Gothic beast of a house, its windows shuttered tight, its chimneys cold. It looked abandoned, yet the grass on the front lawn was curiously short, as if grazed by invisible sheep. Elara skirted the main house, following the path toward the rear of the property where the famous stone garden was said to lie. She stepped through a crumbling archway and stopped dead in her tracks. The rumors hadn't done it justice. It wasn't just a garden. It was a ballroom frozen in time. Scattered across a vast circular lawn were dozens of statues carved from white marble. But these weren't the stiff, idealized figures she was used to seeing in museums. These statues were terrifyingly human. To her left, a young woman in a lace gown appeared to be tripping, her hand thrown out to catch a fall that never came. To her right, 2 men were locked in what looked like a heated argument, their mouths open in silent shouts, the veins in their necks bulging with stone rage. Elara walked slowly among them, the hair on her arms standing up. The level of detail was unnerving. She could see the individual strands of hair, the wrinkles in the fabric of a coat, the tiny imperfections in the skin. The moss and ivy had been cruel to them. Green vines wrapped around their throats and limbs, binding them to the earth as if dragging them down into the soil. "I'm here to help," she whispered, the sound of her own voice startling her. She made her way to the center of the garden. Here, the layout changed. The chaotic scattering of figures gave way to a central focal point, a massive, dried-up fountain basin filled with dead autumn leaves. And rising from the center of the fountain, on a high pedestal, stood the master of the garden. He was different from the others. While they were white marble, he was carved from a dark, storm-gray stone that seemed to absorb the light. He was a man of imposing height, dressed in a long Victorian frock coat. His posture was one of command, yet his face held an expression of profound, agonizing desperation. His right hand was outstretched, palm up, fingers slightly curled, as if he were begging for a savior, or perhaps just a dance partner. Elara climbed over the rim of the fountain, the dry leaves crunching loudly in the stillness. She approached the pedestal, looking up into his face. He was handsome, devastatingly so, with high cheekbones and a sharp jawline softened by the sorrow in his stone eyes. "Who left you like this?" she murmured. Vines of thick, woody nightshade had coiled around his legs and waist, twisting tight enough to crack lesser stone. Elara set her bag down and pulled out her shears. She began to work, her movements efficient and careful. For hours, the only sounds were the snip, snip of her shears and the rustle of falling vines. As she cleared the overgrowth, she found herself touching him with a strange reverence. She used a soft brush to sweep the lichen from his cheekbones. She used a damp cloth to clean the grime from his outstretched hand. The stone was freezing, a deep, penetrating cold that seeped through her gloves. But she didn't stop. There was an intimacy to the work that made her blush. She was tracing the line of a stranger's jaw, cleaning the dust from the hollow of his throat. She felt a connection she couldn't explain, a heaviness in her chest that mirrored the desperation on his face. By the time she finished, twilight had bled into the sky, turning the horizon a bruised purple. The garden was falling into shadow. Elara stepped back to admire her work. The Grey Lord stood free, his dark form stark and powerful against the dim light. "You look lonely up there," she said softly. A sudden gust of wind tore through the garden, whistling through the empty fountain. The temperature plummeted. Elara shivered, zipping her jacket higher. It was time to go. The gatehouse where she was staying was a mile back down the road. She turned to leave, her boot hitting the edge of the fountain. Thump, thump. Elara froze. The sound was low, barely audible, like a drum beating deep underground. She waited. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. She shook her head, laughing nervously at herself. "Just the pipes," she muttered. "Old house, old pipes." Thump, thump. It was louder this time. Distinct, rhythmic. She turned slowly back toward the statue. The sound wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from him. Against every instinct that screamed at her to run, Elara stepped back into the fountain. The sound grew stronger with every step. Thump, 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 thump. It was a heartbeat, slow, heavy, and struggling like a dormant engine trying to turn over. Trembling, Elara pulled off her work glove. She needed to know. She needed to feel it. She reached up, placing her bare palm flat against the dark stone of his chest, right over where a heart should be. The cold was gone. The stone was warm. Not the warmth of the sun, but the feverish, biological warmth of a living thing. And beneath her hand, the stone vibrated with the force of that impossible rhythm. Thump, thump. Elara gasped, snatching her hand back as if burned. She stumbled backward, tripping over the leaves and landing hard on her elbows. She stared up at him, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The shadows were deep now, playing tricks on her mind, but as she watched, paralyzed by fear and awe, she saw it. The statue didn't move his body, he didn't lower his arm. But his eyes, those desperate carved stone eyes, rolled downward. They focused directly on her,